Out of it. All right, so we have not met in 2 weeks. Remember, I was off last week. I don't even know what I was doing. Oh, I had to go to a training or something. I would have rather have been here with all of you, of course. Hi, Edith.
Hello, sorry.
That's all right. So we're gonna go into review because we're really gonna need to do that. It's been 2 weeks, so we want to refresh our memory on what we talked about. Who remembers? Do you just remember?
Only 3 hours. And that was 2 weeks ago?
You can't remember? We talked about hunter-gatherers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, remember? Now you remember. And the hunter-gatherer does what?
He hunts and
Hunts
Hunts and gathers, follows the flock, follows his food source wherever the food source goes. And that's where the small tribes will go. That's how they survived, and they did that for a long time. We also talked about how it is thought that people got into the Americas, and that would have been by the Bering Strait, because this is during the Ice Age, and there was a land bridge where people were following the herds, crossed the land bridge. I mean, they didn't probably know what they were doing, but they crossed the land bridge from Siberia into Alaska and then come down where? Yes, come down the west coast into the Americas. But one of the little by the ways that I had for you last time was that you would expect that the spearheads that were of this time frame would be found here, correct?
Right.
Except guess where they were found? Yeah, the Clovis points they were found that more closely resembled European spearheads were found on the East Coast, and that could suggest what?
The Vikings,
The Vikings?
The Europeans came in from the other side.
From the other sides. Well, how would they have had to get there? By sea, exactly, Bill. That's exactly right. So that's a really interesting curiosity. It's a mystery how that happened. And then I also share with you another, by the way, which was, does anybody remember the animal that was indigenous to the Americas does not exist here now? Excellent, wow. That was 2 whole weeks ago and you remember that.
That was special.
That was special. Yes, don't ask me to do it again. That was surprising. So yeah, camels were indigenous to the Americas. And we also talked 2 weeks ago about how early Homo sapiens sapiens domesticated animals, correct? You remember that? And what was the first animal that was domesticated by early man? Yes, dogs. And was it accidental or intentional? Did they know what they were doing?
No.
The dogs or the people?
The people. Or the dogs too, the wolves. Did the wolves know what they were doing? Did the wolves know that this was going to happen? What do you think? Do you think they would have come up to the campfire if they knew this was going to happen?
They would have run.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Yeah. They're going to dress us. They're going to put bows in our hair. They're going to cut our nails. That's the worst.
Paint our nails.
Paint our nails, make us take a bubble bath. They probably never would have gone anywhere near us if they had known. And then here are some other of the domesticated animals that, do you know that, I looked this up and if I remember correctly, there are over 2 million species of creatures, 2 million kinds of creatures. And do you know how many we have been able to domesticate? 40.
Wow.
40. 40. That's not a lot. That's not a lot. I think there's like 6,000 mammals Yeah, so with insects and reptiles and all of that, we've only been able, there is over 2 million, and we've only been able to domesticate 40. 40! All right, and then it wasn't just animals that we domesticated. What else did we domesticate? What else did we modify and change?
Birds.
Yeah. Yeah, grains, yep. So, yes, so we were able to do that, but it took a really long time. And then something happened that created a change in human behavior, and that was the end of the Ice Age. The end of the Ice Age, and what were people starting to do at the end of the Ice Age?
Travel.
Go north.
Did you say travel?
Yeah.
It's the opposite of travel. What's the opposite of travel?
Stagnate.
Yes, they started to have a more sedentary lifestyle at the end of the Ice Age. And this idea of farming comes up, and it comes up all around the world. We think of it as happening just in the Fertile Crescent, but within a couple of thousand years of each other, it is popping up all over the world. And archaeologists taking a look at this, they're saying to themselves, why farming? Why farming? And a couple of weeks ago, we took a look at that. It's hard, right? Samantha, would you mind just pulling that door closed for me, please? Why farming? Why farming? It is really difficult to do. You have to clear the land by hand, because they didn't have the equipment. Right?
They didn't have the animals.
You have to create,
They filled, they could raise families, they could put on weight, they didn't have to run around all the time, they didn't have to.
they could put on weight, did you say? Well, it's so much harder to farm. Farming wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a guarantee any more than hunting and gathering. In fact, hunting and gathering was more secure, because at the end of the Ice Age, was there plenty of growth? There was plenty of growth. And we know this because we took a look at, they were really gathering, we took a look at some sedentary settlements. You remember Ohalo 2? And what did we see there? We had a little clip of that. We see a semi-permanent living area for a group, remember this one? And storage areas, so storing grains and nuts and everything that they were able to collect, because at that time, at the end, when the earth warmed up and there was more precipitation, then there was more grass growing, there was more cereals growing, more nuts, more fruits. Everything was growing, and so it was easier to just collect the wild stuff. Is it easier to just collect the wild stuff than it is to try to farm it?
Yeah.
It was so much easier. So farming is a big curiosity in archaeology. Here's another section of that site. See how large it is? I was showing this to you because it's by a road and you can get some perspective. So that's a fairly big area. Okay, so we took a look at that, and we also took a look at the people who were the link between the nomadic tribes and the farmers. This took a couple of thousand years for it to transition over. Do you remember the people? Do you remember their name? It does begin with it. It's not Neanderthal, but it begins with an N. It was something like that. It was called the Natufians. Yes, the Natufians, right?
I want to be a Natufian.
You want to be a Natufian?
No.
No, you don't want to be a Natufian? Well, we learned a little bit about them, and we did learn that they had very specific burial sites. Do you remember that? So it appears, or this suggests, that there was a belief in an afterlife, or they wanted to honor people in death. Remember, this is a woman who was buried with several artifacts. and she was buried on a bed of flowers. And Barbara, I hope you remember this one. Somebody was buried with an elaborate headdress that you thought looked like perm curlers.
Yeah.
You remember that? Yes, and then we also saw that they had tools, and we looked at some of their tools. These are very interesting. Edith, you pointed out that this is probably a belt buckle,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it's like the Japanese, the sushi, that they ran a belt string to it, and that's how they kept their rubber together.
Yeah, exactly. And these beads here look like button. I mean, I don't know if they're beads. They look like they're either beads or buttons, or what could they be?
Necklace.
A necklace or something? Yes. Yep. So these are artifacts that were found in the Natufian site, and then we looked at some of their artwork. You remember these?
That's
All right. Well, if you don't, that's okay, but I'm absolutely certain you'll remember the next one. Yep, remember that? Goodness. Yeah, and there's more than just, it wasn't just one two-headed thing, there were several of them. All right, and then you might also remember from last time that we believe that the Natufians baked bread, which was good. Because they needed something to eat while they were drinking their what?
beer.
Beer. Yes. Yes, it also seems like they were brewing beer at that time. All right, and then it stopped. It stops. The sedentary lifestyle stops. And the reason why it stops in the archaeological record is because we have another smaller ice age comes in with the Younger Dryas. It stops. And what other people completely prepared to do again? They go back to hunter-gatherer. They're able to go right back to it. However, when that subsides, we find what appears again. Right away, it appears again. The sedentary, yes, the gathering, the staying in one spot. And we looked at this site in Syria, you may recall, and it's a much larger, more complex, and these are grain storage areas. So again, they're collecting large amounts of grains and fruits and other things. You remember this? This mysterious tower here? All right, and then we looked at this. This is a large area that looks like it might have been a gathering place. Might have been some kind of a temple. And if it was, it's not the earliest one. Who remembers the earliest one? Nell, you know what it is.
No, I don't.
You knew 2 weeks
I've been
ago.
trying to think of that first word. I can always remember the Tempe part, but I can't remember
Yes,
that.
that's right. You're exactly right. Gobekli Tepe. Remember from last time? Gobekli Tepe. This is 7,000 years before Stonehenge. That's how old it is. It's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. And then we took closer and closer look at it, and we all kind of speculated. Do you remember this from a couple of weeks ago? And we all kind of speculated on what was going here. Pat, you thought that looked like a bus. Yeah.
3 cars on the bus.
Yes. So we were taking a look at that, and then these other carvings into this site is really kind of incredible, isn't it?
Might suggest aliens.
You're going to suggest aliens? That's certainly been put out there. It certainly has been put out there. And then do you remember the translation of Gobekli Tepe? What does Gobekli Tepe translate into? Does anybody remember? Potbelly Hill. Yes, it just means Potbelly Hill. All right, so that kind of catches us up from 2 weeks ago. You remembered all of that, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
You remembered everything from,
Did they find that as a result of one of the seas, kind of?
Gobekli Tepe is up on a hill.
Oh, okay.
And so you'll find a lot, there's all kinds of mounds. We have them here in the United States too, but you have to dig into them. And you'll have, there's ground penetrating radar that will give you like a ultrasound of what's under there. And if you find these, so archaeologists will look at these mounds and know that something's probably under there. And they'll know where to dig. Other things are discovered accidentally because of drought, because of earthquakes,
Right.
or because a construction site hit something. Yes, and now they're, I think it's by law they have to report it. They have to stop what they're doing. So I'm sure they're thrilled when they hit something. And they have to stop work. All right, so it is these people, the Natufians, these people that are the transition culture between hunter-gatherers and the real farmers, And it cannot be overstated the profound changes that occur when people start farming. Those changes are lifestyle changes that we live with to this day. And this time period that we're talking about now is about 7,000 BC. And we're going to start with one of the biggest changes, important change that happened right around that time period. Do you all know what this is?
The wheel. Yes.
Ooh, that was a great invention, right? Yeah. Is there anything more important than the invention of the wheel? And of course, what was the wheel used for?
Every millstone.
Traveling. That's going to be your answer, Dennis, for everything today.
Moving things from one place to another.
Actually, the wheel
Like grinding.
was not invented originally to transport. Do you know what the wheel was invented for?
Grinding.
Grinding.
Pottery. Pottery. The very first use of the wheel was for pottery. So everything that we've been talking about up until now is the pre-pottery Neolithic. All right? Pottery is crucial, absolutely crucial in understanding the past. It gives us a hint to where we are, what time frame, what's the culture. Pottery is critical to that. The wheel was invented in order for people to make pottery. All right, we know that the Natufians were using plaster and clay, right? Because you remember these guys. Yeah, so we know they're using plaster and they're using clay. Well, they carry on and they find even more uses for plaster and for clay, and one of them is pottery. Here is some ancient pottery shards from that time frame in that part of the world, and they're not using a pottery wheel at this time, they're forming it. And what they're doing is making small bowls. They're making small containers. Here are some right here. Okay, not too elaborate, right?
No, but those first ones had decorations on them. And that,
They did, look at them.
and that tells me an awful lot.
It tells you an awful lot.
Yeah.
What does it tell you?
That we may think of them as primitive, as uneducated, as barely above the apes, but they did something and they decorated it.
Well, I don't know who would think of them as primitive and just above the apes. They domesticated animals, which we've not been able to do, correct? They're the ones that created civilization. They're the ones that invented all of these things that we use today. I think you're absolutely right, Barbara. They are highly intelligent and highly skilled. They're the ones that are coming up with all of the things that we now live with. It's from these people.
How did they make those bowls and things stay together though? We use a kiln and such now.
Well, they put them out in the sun,
Ah.
or they put them near a fire. It's what they think
Okay.
happened, and then they develop kilns. I have a little clip here. Let me play the little clip I have for you.
Clay is one of the most universal materials known to humans. Throughout history and around the world, people have developed the art of forming clay to make ceramic objects, also known as pottery. Clay is made of just two simple ingredients, water and earth. It's formed into different shapes with tools and by hand, and when the clay is formed, high levels of heat harden it to create a sturdy ceramic object. Early pottery was heated in the sun or by a fire. Later on, potters developed special ovens called kilns to control the firing conditions. This is what you'll see being used in a pottery studio or an art classroom. Early cultures used clay to make containers that could hold water. That meant that they could cook and store foods like vegetables and meats. Improving food quality meant larger populations can survive. Once a ceramic bowl or cup is made, it can be decorated with color and with designs. Pottery is an art form that grew out of the daily needs of life. Fired pottery is solid and durable, and it can last for up to tens of thousands of years. Because of this, ceramics are an important source of information for historians and for archaeologists. Pieces of ceramics found in the earth help tell us about ancient cultures. They're like an ancient encyclopedia, answering questions about the lives of those who lived in the past. Clay has been around for almost all of human history, and it's still being used in new and exciting ways today. When you make a pinch pot or a clay sculpture, you're creating an artifact that could be found by someone hundreds of years in the future. When we work with clay, we're carrying on the traditions of our ancestors. We're remembering the crafts of past civilizations, and at the same time, we're making a new and beautiful piece of art.
Did you want to jump in and help that little girl lift that off yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not sure it's going to be considered wonderful.
So the wheel was invented for pottery. And pottery is critically important to our understanding of the past, to identify what happened where. Now, the wheel, of course, eventually was used, not too much long after they figured out, wow, we've got other things we can do with this thing. So shortly after, it becomes a wheel for carts, and then it goes on to do even grander, more wonderful things like, chariots, right? Chariots. All right, but let's get back to pottery. Okay, so here's pottery at that time. Okay, this is in the Ubaid period. And I just want to show you how important it is. I'll bet, do you think that you, everyone in this room, can identify pottery if I show you different styles? Do you think you can do that? All right, we want to identify the culture first. Are you ready? You just shout it out. I'll show you, you tell me what you think it is.
Egyptian.
Excellent, yes, you're right.
China.
Roman.
Greece.
Greece, who said Greece? Greek, yep.
Grecian.
China, yeah, exactly.
Mexico.
Excellent, very good, yes. So you see how there are very distinct styles and that we're able to identify it, and we're not even archaeologists, are we? But we,
We're just smart.
yeah, see how smart you are? And then also we're able to date things, right? So I'm going to show you some pottery right here. And can anybody guess maybe what culture that is?
100 years.
Scandinavian. All right, and we can tell what time frame that's from by the design. Okay, so we know that's between the 6th and the 7th century, that the Scandinavians, who are the Scandinavians? We might know them better as
Vikings.
Vikings, yes. All right, so I'm going to show you some pottery. The next slide is pottery from the same culture, but I want you to tell me what time frame it's from. Are you ready?
Modern time.
You can buy that on Amazon, and you can get it as soon as tomorrow. Okay?
That's prime.
Yeah, so you can buy that today. So we know, like, years into the future, if they come across something like this, they'll be able to identify that this culture had a great sense of humor.
Christmas list.
All right, you want that for Christmas?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, that's it. All right, good to know. All right, so it's from this point in time now that we're going to go forward into forms, very specific forms of towns and cities. All right, so they're starting to farm, they're starting to make pottery, they're starting to use the wheel, and as they're staying put, it's no longer temporary sedentary homes, it's permanent homes, all right? And they're going to start in this area of the world, and it's in this area of the world, I mean, as far as we know, that we have the oldest city. Would you like to see the oldest city?
Sure.
All right, here's a piece of it. Here's another. Isn't that great? All right, I'm going to show you another photo. And I'll show you one more and then see if you can guess what is the world's oldest city.
Okay. Jericho.
Yeah,
What about China?
Jericho from the Bible. Yep. Jericho from the Bible is considered the world's oldest city.
Now, what about what was going on in China in those days?
China in those days is right on par with everything that's happening in the Levant, in the Fertile Crescent. They're just like a little bit behind. So is Egypt. So they all emerge right around the same time. It's amazing because they're saying that they were isolated. But is that something worthy of a second look? Okay, so it's happening right in this part of the world. And why would that be? Why is farming happening right here? What do they have? What do they have?
Water.
Oh, good, exactly. The Tigris and the Euphrates is what they have. And so they're able to develop. What are they going to develop from the Tigris and the Euphrates? Farming, but how are they going to be able to do it? They develop, yes, they develop irrigation systems. They develop great irrigation systems because if you are now, thank you, Samantha, if you are now going to be farming and you've got permanent settlements and you're growing from, say, a tribe of 30 or 40 and you've got a town now of a few hundred, what do you have to do? You have to feed them. Yes, you have to feed them. So they're figuring out how to use irrigation, and they're able to feed and supply for hundreds of people. And so now you have the first actual city, the first real city. And the first real city is the city of Uruk. Why is this a real city? Well, it is built, this is a sketch from the excavation sites. All right, for the first time, you have this is the center of the city, and what is that building? It's on a ziggurat. This is a ziggurat. Do you know the ziggurat is the precursor to the pyramid?
Wow.
Yep, it's the precursor to the pyramid. We're going to be looking at Egyptian civilization next week. All right, so this is the central building, and what might that be?
Storage?
Storage, a distribution center, exactly. Yeah, it could be a distribution center. What else could it be?
Religious,
A religious center, yes. And it could be a gathering place for town hall meetings like we had this morning. All right, the roads are planned. This is an aerial sketch of the site, and you can see that the roads are planned, and everything all around it is all around this distribution center. All right, the center of their harvest, of their farming. And there's got to be thousands of people now in the city of Uruk. We also have a more highly skilled craft with clay and plaster. Here is the head of a statue that was found near the central building. All right, so that's more realistic, a more realistic looking face. So is this a goddess? Is this something that's protecting the distribution building? We don't know what it is. We don't know what it is, right? Because they didn't leave us with what?
Written.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, we don't have that. We just don't have that. All right, but guess what? We're going to lead up to it right here. It's going to lead us directly to that from here in Uruk, the city of Uruk. All right, so we know that they've used clay for pottery and figurines and statues, right? But guess what? They thought to themselves, there's more we can do with the clay. There's more we can do with this wonderful substance. And when they thought about it, they came up with something absolutely revolutionary. No, they didn't make fireworks out of clay. I just wanted to show you the celebration. All right, this is celebratory because what they did next
houses,
changes everything. Changes everything.
Bricks.
Bricks.
houses,
What else could they have done with clay? Bricks, houses,
fences,
fences,
Utensils.
utensils.
Tablets.
statues.
All right, let's find out what else they did that changed everything for all of us.
Coins.
The first thing, well, these are seals. These aren't coins, but we'll get to that. These are seals, okay? So now if you're in a city and there's thousands of people there, do you need to be identifying yourself and your property? You do. You do, because everybody might not know you by name. And so these are seals, all right? See the stamp? That's the this is the bottom of this, all right? So people are carving into clay these little seals to identify themselves. From there, they go another step because, of course, they're in a city, and so now lots of buying and selling is going on, right? Yeah, lots of buying and selling is going on, and so from the seals to demonstrate ownership, we have these tokens, and these tokens represent certain kinds of merchandise. At least that's what archaeologists think for right now. So the tokens represent purchasing a certain item. So is that sort of like currency? Yeah, it's kind of like currency.
Is it
Well, yeah,
Bartering? Do they barter?
I would imagine. I would imagine
They
so.
don't need to if they have money.
All right.
They don't need to if they have money.
All right, so now if you're buying and selling, and you have tokens to prove it or identify it, you also need to count it, right? You need to count what you're buying and what you're selling. And so look at what we have. Chocolate chip cookies. It must be near dinner. Is it near dinner? All right, look at what you're see what you're looking at here. That could represent tens or single, we don't really know, but these are counting whatever it is that you're purchasing. And then we're going to take another step, a little bit more elaborate step. The next thing that I'm showing you is called a cylinder seal. All right, so the cylinder seal, all right, you've got this seal right here. You carve a seam into the seal, and then you roll it out onto the clay, and it tells a story, doesn't it? It tells a story. I have a clearer one right here for you to see. All right, so here's the cylinder, and you carve it out. It's like the negative of a photograph, right? You know what else it reminds me? Does anyone remember Silly Putty?
Yes.
Right, it you can still buy Silly Putty?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, probably on Amazon, and you can have it as soon as tomorrow.
Yep.
All right, so you'd have to look at how beautiful they are, and so it tells a story, and you just roll it out, and you could be sending a message to somebody. All right, so you carve it in a cylinder seal, and then you send it to someone. You roll it out, and it will tell you the story. First newspaper. I love it. Yes, exactly. That's exactly
How do
right.
you send it?
What?
How do you send it? UPS.
A runner.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they didn't have postal service.
Well, they probably had a runner. They had a runner.
Oh, of course.
Yes, of course.
Michelle, was
Yes.
there any hierarchy to this?
We're gonna get to that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Good. No, don't be sorry. I love that. Yes, because that's how we're thinking. That's exactly what we're seeing. All right, so farming leads to towns, leads to cities, leads to currency, leads to getting information, leads to needing to identify yourself. Do you need to be able to identify yourself today? Yeah, of course you do. Of course you do. It's imperative that you do. All right, so they take this, and then they have to do a little bit better at communicating, and we have something called proto-cuneiform. Do you know what proto-cuneiform is? It is the earliest known, the earliest known form of writing. The earliest known form of writing. All right, so what are these ancient Sumerian people doing? They're creating written language. They're creating the written language. Here are some of the symbols. Do you know they had over 900 symbols? That was a little difficult. Can you imagine our alphabet if it was over 900 symbols?
But we didn't ever get out of the first grade?
Exactly, you wouldn't get out of the first grade. Yeah, no, it would be too difficult. Well, they realized that it was too difficult, and it wasn't really working that well, but it was a great idea. So they had to modify it, and they did modify it, and then what we have now is cuneiform. The development, they're not doing the symbols. You could have symbols that represented a sheep, or represented wheat, or represented a farmer, or whatever it was, a bird or something, and the alphabet, the letter next to it. So it was very, very confusing. So they had to whittle it all down, and this is the cuneiform, And you could actually use it. You can actually use the ancient cuneiform alphabet to equate it with the English alphabet, although look how complicated it still is. I'm very grateful for our alphabet. All right, who would want to do all this? Look at this one. Woo! All right, so the very first writing. Yes, Anna, did you want
We had, or like when I was in school, we had an exercise like this where we wrote on tablets, and to make it easier, like most of the time they took vowels out of the words just to keep them a little bit shorter.
Oh, yes. So Anna is saying that they did an exercise using these ancient languages, but they took the vowels out of the words to make it shorter because they're complex. The symbols are so complex. Yes, Hebrew had no vowels. So if you're reading the Old Testament, if you're reading the Old Testament in the original Hebrew, it's written without vowels. Did you know that? Yeah, there's no vowels. All right? So, all right, this is a crucial point in history. In fact, this defines history. And when I say it defines history, I mean that. Because it is at this point, when we have written language, that we are no longer in prehistory. We are now in history. The very definition of prehistory is pre-written language. All right? All right, so now we know some stuff. Because what do we have?
Records.
Yes, we have records. So everything up until now, I've been saying what? Best guess, they think, it's hard, right. Now we have a little bit more to stand on, don't we? We have something substantial. How accurate are they as reporters? We don't know, but we've got a little bit more. Now, Dolly, you asked about the culture. What was the hierarchy there? Well, because we do have now a written language, there's something from Europe called the Standard List of Professions. So we know that in this great city of Europe, there were all these different professions. They're listed here, and we can read them, and here it is. We know that they have kings, they have ambassadors, they have priests, all right, and then they have blue-collar workers, right? That's all written down, and we can have a better understanding of the government. This too is what makes it an actual city, because we know that there's a government, we know that there's a currency, we know that there's a system, we know that there's a hierarchy. We know, unfortunately, that there's slavery, because there's records of that as well. But let's just take a second. We're going to look at our very first city, and then what happens? What pops up all over the place after this first one? Then everybody wants to be a city, right?
Communities to develop and evolve rapidly due to high levels of integration and affords the individual with protection and unique services. The adoption of farming and substantial improvements in irrigation eventually brought tremendous surpluses to communities, leading to population explosions. These factors meant that some people were able to survive off the labor of others and led to these people seeking to improve the community by training and specializing in a certain field. Produce, raw materials, and manufactured goods were then traded further afield to other communities, with the transactions falling under the control of certain families, enabling them to hold influence over their society. These elevated groups would form the leadership of grand societies, overseeing the rise of their settlements and the advancement of science and culture. This is Ansostoria, the rise of the city-state. Mesopotamia, a region in the Middle East between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, a region with few water sources and scarce rainfall. Even so, our ancestors came to farm the region in 3000 HE, only settling in areas where rainfall was predictable. But within the next 1,000 years, they occupied the riverbanks and diverted the water to irrigate their crops, which were bred to be heat tolerant. In the lowlands of Mesopotamia, settlements began forming around the Euphrates by 4200 HE. The most prominent, Uruk, was a city concentrated around a temple or ziggurat beginning in 5400 HE. A social hierarchy formed with the leadership controlling both the temple and the city, with the elites clustered nearest to the ziggurat, then the craftsmen, and the furthest were the farmers who supported those in the inner city. Lined with vast canals, they facilitated movement and trade around the city, the surrounding settlements, and out to the Euphrates. Over the next 1400 years, mines and towns extended hundreds of kilometers from the main city, all relying on each other for food, materials, and defense. An increasingly complex society decided the fates of nearly 90,000. They taxed the surpluses of the farmers, storing them in the Great Temple before redistributing them to the thousands of craftsmen and miners who supported the city. At the same time, residents flowed from southern Mesopotamia towards the north, spawning colonies that mirrored their original cities, while traders spread their culture to already established settlements. A new system, cuneiform, was developed in Uruk around 6700 HE that allowed them to record not only complicated financial transactions, but also inventories and administrative matters. Cuneiform is the world's first writing system, one of our ancestors' greatest inventions. It has allowed us to retain memory far more complex and long-lasting than traditional oral memory. No longer does the owner of the memory have to be present in order to recount their experiences. We can look at a series of lines in front of us, and they are transmuted into a spoken language in our minds. The successes of kings, financial records, religions, and great stories are all laid bare for us to witness the inner workings of our ancestors. Through the extensive trade network, copper came to Mesopotamia from the Iranian plateau around 6500 HE, and within 500 years, the metalsmiths discovered how to alloy the materials with lead and tin, which turned this soft metal into bronze and other tough materials. This new invention would quickly spread out across Mesopotamia, improving implements for both agriculture and war. Tensions escalated throughout the region, and neighboring city-states clashed over the demarcation of their borders, while fortifications protected the residents inside. With the advent of city-states in recorded history, a common culture perforated throughout Mesopotamia, while a sophisticated rule of elites commanded their lands through comprehensive governing that combined both civil and religious aspects. Writing allowed for the elaboration of trade and the codification of science and culture, whilst the dawn of the Bronze Age inflamed the ambitions of the elites as they sought the subjugation of neighboring settlements. This is Ancestria, the history of our ancestors.
All right,
I'm not Catholic, it doesn't matter.
so you see how you cannot overstate the importance of writing and the importance of what this civilization did. Are we living in a similar environment today? We live in cities. We rely on farmers outside of our culture to bring the food in to us. We barter for it or we pay for it. Right? We have a system of government. We have a religious system. All of these things were developed thousands and thousands of years ago that we still have today. And writing is what helps us to understand what it is that our ancestors did. Do you see this library right here? All right, this is the library of a king who comes later. Some hundreds of years later. His name is Ashurbanipal. I have no idea why I remember that. Ashurbanipal is the name of the king. And he's got like the first library. That's probably why I remember him, because I love libraries. It's a clay tablet. Look at it. It's a clay tablet library. All right, and these clay tablets are full of stories from the past, and we can know that York has a king and a rich history, and all of these magnificent stories that happened because they're recorded down on these clay tablets. And one of the most famous kings in the Ashurbanipal library, you might be familiar with, you might know his name, and we're going to talk about that next week. No, well, we are, but I'll tell you. The name of the king,
Nebuchadnezzar.
not Nebuchadnezzar, before Nebuchadnezzar. Gilgamesh.